Ma'am, if I could come to you now, because you were the HRD minister, and you've seen, you've sort of seen the evolution of the Indian education sector from very close quarters. And one concern that has often come up is about the quality of students, especially at the primary level. And and perhaps many would agree with me in this room that there was a feeling that when India gained independence, most of the other East Asian economies invested a lot in education. Somehow India did not. I think per year, I think I was reading Utkarsh article, less than $2 million, Utkarsh, isn't that right?
That's 5 years.
So do you think in hindsight that was a mistake for which we are still paying? And how do we overcome this historical legacy that this government has inherited?
I think in hindsight, everything is 2020. So to say that everything went wrong and to say that we are burdened with past legacies would be an understatement. Money is not the problem. In my 2.5 years in the education system, money was never the problem. I think, as Dr. Rao has said in his opening remarks, the problem is also about mindset. In your opening remarks yourself, you brought everybody to notice that when we talk about 2/3 of the population, the number is enormous. It's 800 million people. Now, how do you use that amount of energy in your country to help them become a part of the solution? In this very hall, close to 2 years ago, we started something called the Unnat Bharat Abhiyan. And we had told every higher educational institution, and in fact IIT Delhi is now where it is instituted, now where the fulcrum of the whole activity is, we said that instead of us going and asking people to help solve grassroots challenges, can institutions like IITs or colleges or universities look at only 5 villages around your institution, take the technology that you are developing or you have access to and apply it only to those 5 villages and see how many people get help. I was recently told by Dr. Rao that that number of villages that now interact in terms of technology and giving them inputs in terms of education has risen to 1,000. Now imagine this is just around 100 institutes which are now working with 1,000 villages. Imagine if many of us start taking that route of engaging with people using technology as an enabler and making sure that there are resources that they can connect to directly. For instance, when I was in HRD, we said that today one of the biggest challenges for children is access to resource materials, like books or additional material that they'd like to possibly read. We digitized every book in the school system available to us. We also recognize that when you talk about medium of instruction, people say, especially in the rural area, that I might have books written in English, but I do not speak that language. How do I get access to that knowledge? We started a portal which converted every available English book that is fed into the system into a local dialect in 22 scheduled languages. The issue is now that those structures have been created. How are we linking more and more people to those structures? And I think that is where the solution lies, because the Prime Minister, as he has said often, is that to presume that the government only can make things work means that we believe that democracy fundamentally means I've chosen somebody for 5 years, they'll give us a solution, and we'll see what happens after 5 years. What is significant about these 3 years is that for the first time, we are having conversations on details of what makes the economy tick, details of how we can make our education system better. So we have moved from this paralysis in our democracy, where people just looked at a political establishment and said, well, nothing is working, we'll look at it and revisit our views 5 years down the line. Now, with even engagements like MyGov, people are coming forth and saying, I have a view on a policy decision that you're about to make, and if you take my view into consideration, maybe your path will change. And I think that interaction is something which is very different about this particular government. And that interaction is not limited to education, it goes beyond and actually touches almost every segment of governance. So education is just one part. For instance, we talk about innovation, and Jayant is absolutely right when he says that when people look at India, they look at affordable innovation. When I talk to children, let's say in the 12th standard, or those who have gotten into the undergrad program, most of them said, well, if I just had somebody encourage me when I was in the 6th standard, possibly I could have been more inclined towards science. Because when you look at the measurement of how aptitude-wise a child fares, you will see that in science and mathematics it's declining. So how do you arrest that decline? Niti Aayog started something called the Tinkering Labs, and Atal Innovation Mission is now looking at upgrading labs only from the 6th standard to the 12th standard. Similarly, I saw that most of the time when we looked at entrance into the IIT system, 90% to 95% of them were men. And I said, what happens to the female population? And we were told, well, in the 12th standard or the 11th standard, people felt that it's nice to give these extra support to a male child in the family because the daughter has to get married and leave. So if we have to send them for, let's say, some coaching, why spend on the girl? We'll spend on the boy. And that is why more and more women were falling out, so much so that when I went to the Bhabha Atomic Research Center, I found 75% of the administrative staff was women, but the scientific staff had only 25% of women in it. And when we spoke to female scientists, they said, well, if just somebody reaches out to these girls, possibly we can, see some kind of an increase in the number of girls who participate in institutes like IIT. So we started something called UDAN, very small. We said those girls with the aptitude for science in 11th and 12th, we will give you additional devices where you can study, a 24/7 helpline. We had IIT professors, school principals who said, well, I will take the responsibility of one child. I'm a phone call away from that child. And every weekend when the child would sit for some kind of an exam or a competency test with these professors, whatever marks they would get, we would end up paying that amount as fee for the child when she would enter into the system of any science and technology institution. And we've met with 80% success in it. So these are the baby steps that we've taken, and this is not a step taken only by the government. We've had professors stand up and say, we'll help. And I feel that that is the way forward, a synergy between government and people, because ultimately what we are trying to fix is ours, our own country.
You gave the example, ma'am, of the initiative of the portal, the mygov.in, and that kind of preempted my question. So I want to throw one more question to you and Minister Jayant Sinha before I throw it open to my panelists. Tell me, I'm rather curious to know, because, we have a young population, aspirational, information barriers are breaking down. What sort of pressure does it put on ministers and politicians? What sort of an impact does this have on governance? Ma'am, if you could start, and then I'll ask Mr. Sinha to comment.
I think that one of the best impacts I have seen is the response time by the government. Let's say even in an establishment like the IIT Delhi, when I walked in and I met Dr. Rao, the first question I asked was, did the hostel food get better? Because the last time I had a student, when I was in HRD, who tweeted to me that, ma'am, next time you come to IIT Delhi, can you just pop into our hostel facilities? And I did. And Dr. Rao was kind enough, that was one of his first few days in the organization. He went around and now he tells me that I sit there once a week, I eat with the students. I think that when a citizen reaches out to you and then you respond not only as a government but also institutions which are not government per se, but at least in some way or the other associated with government, I think that helps bring solutions faster.